learn by scars, you learn by failing, live to fight another day, if this is the world that you like. I think there's a lot of really smart, talented entrepreneurs right now that they're 25 or they're 65. The long and the short of it is I like complex problems. I like where people interface with technology and all the math that sits around it. Progress usually speaks for itself.
All right, I'm super excited for this week's episode of the Silicon Valley Podcast. Before we start, two things. One, I want to thank Manish Patel, who made the intro to this week's guest. If it wasn't for him, this wouldn't have happened, and you could check out his episode in our archives. Second, for everyone out there, I did launch the investment bank, people that have been following the podcast. But with that, now I got to read a nice little disclaimer at the beginning of all my podcasts. So the views and opinions expressed in this episode are for informational purposes only and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or positions of any affiliate organizations, employees, or the podcast host. This content is not intended to be and should not be construed as legal, investment, or professional advice. Also, the views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of Finalis Inc. or Finalis Securities LLC, member FINRA SIPC. And with that, let's start this week's episode of the Silicon Valley Podcast. Ben, for our audience, could you give a brief intro before we dive deep into the questions of your career, your background, kind of a little bit of yourself up until this point?
Thanks for having me on, Sean. And I'll try to remain brief, but I have a weird and windy journey. So my background, I studied computer science and engineering, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and didn't exactly know where I wanted to go and what I wanted to be. Actually spent an internship out in Silicon Valley right during the dot-com bust. So that ages me, by like several decades or whatever. And thought this business thing was interesting. I saw a bunch of companies that were worth a ton of money on paper and then explode, and decided to get a master's. I got a master's in business on a way to a PhD in operations research. The long and the short of it is I like complex problems. I like where people interface with technology and all the math that sits around it. And so I did that for my early years. And then I went to the RAND Corporation, which is a nonprofit think tank. I was working with the Department of Defense and RAND during my PhD studies. I come from a big military family, so I kind of understood that world and found those problems to be fascinating. You got to think about how wars would be fought, how humanitarian crises would be addressed, and all the policies that sat between. So I did that for a few years. And then I came up to Silicon Valley back in late 2010, early 2011, worked at some software companies between there and where I am today. Progressively got deeper and deeper into natural language processing. My first real deep exposure was probably about a decade ago, actually maybe 2013, 2014. I was at a company called Chegg, which was an ed tech company. Still around. It's a public company now, but got to build out a number of teams there, help take the company public, kind of grow up and see what happens when tech startups try to become public-facing operating companies, and that was great. In 2017, I left and I went to another company to focus on natural language processing exclusively. Did a lot of focused on early problems that I think we see today. I would say the precursors to the maybe the BERTs and the XL nets, we were working on those. And what led to this company is we were trying to deploy this technology into large enterprises. And what I kind of saw is there were a couple tectonic shifts happening. The world was really quickly starting to adopt stronger and stronger models, and people were building models, proprietary companies. This is really early OpenAI. They weren't making as much of a splash in 2017 through 19. But then, companies like ours that we were focusing on, that I was at, trying to bring them in the national security community, trying to bring them into banks. And what I felt like it was a real gap was just the orchestration of these models, big, small. Now in the world we talk about agents. Was really, really hard. So others were focusing on building really good models. I thought that there was another opportunity to be gained in thinking about how to actually deploy them, have them running across lots of different clouds, on-premises environments, and lots of different applications. And so in early 22, I started with a company called Yurts, which is now Legion, and the rest has been history.
Okay, so this path you've taken, it's got both the public sector working with the private sector. How have you been able to go from one to the other? What lessons did you learn from those? How different are those work environments, and how did those lessons kind of shape you into the leader you are today with your business?
That's a great question. I think in any industrial sector, a lot of the language can be different. The patterns can be similar. Um, People have legacy applications. People have messed up cloud storage, on-premise storage, security challenges. People have um, common, really like IT challenges, even though they're very different. People have maybe different mission sets. Where you're thinking about, is the mission set your return on investment? Is your mission set trying to prevent or fight a war? So I think maybe what I took for granted in my earlier years is I was fortunate enough to understand a lot of the language and the culture of organizations in the Department of Defense, just being around it so much in my life. My brother is my father, and my stepfather, everyone in my family was in the military. So maybe there was enough time just growing up on base where I think I had some of the constructs to at least understand how to engage, the terminology, how to understand rank and what all the insignias and jargon was, kind of. And then I got to spend a lot of time working with private sector, building models, consulting in grad school after. And so, I think there's certainly nuances. If you do something in healthcare or something in insurance, something in high tech, they're all going to have their own looks and feels and how to do contracts and get deals done and communicate language with customers. But to build companies, I think I've just been fortunate enough to see and be put into progressive leadership positions where you learn by scars, you learn by failing, how to sell, how to lead, how to hire. And I think that's kind of, we work a lot with the Department of Defense, with the national security community now at my current company. But that doesn't necessarily make me a good leader. A lot of lessons that I learned at a company called Chegg was how to grow, how to be an executive, et cetera, in this space. And so I think there's some things that kind of just transfer. I think there's a lot of, I don't think just anyone can jump into defense tech. And I think defense tech is kind of a buzzy, hot space right now. But I think the constructs of like, how do you build a company, how you think about hiring, how you build quality teams, that stuff kind of transcends industry. And so, I've been pretty fortunate enough to see a lot, travel a lot, engage a lot, and then fortunately build some really good teams along the way. And I think that's kind of like the big thing I'm kind of proud of is we have a company of about 60 people now. Say at least a third of the company has worked with me in some various capacity over the last 12 years. So people that I've worked at, and it's basically there's like 3 or 4 companies. There's a group from Looker, including Ben Porterfield, the former co-founder of Looker. He works with us part-time. Jason Schnitzer, who's worked with me at Chegg, is our CTO. They have a couple of guys from Looker, some of us from Chegg, some of us from this company Primer. And so I think, the biggest thing that kind of has shaped the career for me in building this company has also just been building a network of really talented people along the way that you're just like, I like to work with that person. Maybe we could go and do something again. And so far we've had some pretty decent success, and it's because we've known each other. We like working together. And so it's been really nice to be able to move that way. So even though there are folks that we worked in education technology over a decade ago, they're now working in high tech stuff with the Department of Defense, and it's cool. And then you're fortunate enough to find other subject matter experts and bring new people in. And so it's been a great journey so far.
Okay, so you've talked about all the positive and great things that have happened up till now, but in our prep call, you did mention you were temporarily a CEO of a company. It was a very short time. And after you came on board, there's a wind down. What lessons did you learn from that experience that some of our listeners, because our listeners are a lot of entrepreneurs that have had ups and downs in their career, could take away from that experience?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll put it this way. I think this is like my fifth startup. And there have been some real wins and losses along the way. That one, I think there's a lot of really smart, talented entrepreneurs right now that they're 25 or they're 65 and they say, "This is it. I'm starting my thing right now, and I'm going to go and build this company." When I left Rand and moved up here, 15 years ago, I kind of, maybe whatever, I'm Midwestern or old school values, but I kind of felt like there's a path for me to build a company and be a CEO, but today is not that day. And so I really felt like I was focusing on kind of blocking and tackling and getting skills to just move up, not like a corporate ladder, but like a personal ladder of, I was kind of a quant, a bit of a nerd. I wish I kind of still could say that I'm that way now, but I couldn't sell and I couldn't deliver things, but I could solve problems. And so I progressively got a little bit better at certain areas, and even with the leadership stuff, how to hire and how to retain and how to communicate. But along the way, in the macro sense, I just felt like I was growing. But I was at a company that I'd been at for a few years. This is in 2017 through mid 2020. And I got asked to take over the reins of an incubated company. And it took about a week. I decided, okay, I'm going to be CEO. This is great. And so, this was my first time, and I was very excited about that. But it took about a week, and I realized that there were just a lot of reasons why the company had to unwind like effective immediately. And I think the reality is like that's a kind of a gut punch. On the one hand, it wasn't my thing from day one, but to have like catastrophic failure in days feels like it hurts. But it also was a super interesting blessing, maybe months on, and that I'm not sure that where that company would have gone, it would have actually led to a much larger opportunity, which I have today. And so, I think for entrepreneurs, I look at it, and you could look at mixed success of every company that I was at. Helped take one public. The stock price was below my stock option price the day that I left, and then jumped well above it the day that I had before I had to exercise, and then went up like another almost 10x. And so, like, who knows? And frankly, has now gone down a fair amount. And so it's very weird to do and try to build these companies. I was at a company where they had a lot of tailwinds for a long time, and not that long after I left, they had a lot of headwinds. So, I think that isolated events, I think I certainly had my tail between my legs for a few weeks or maybe a couple months, and was woe is me. But the reality is, I think startups, the winds can change really drastically. And you just have to decide, is this something that we can navigate through? Is it something that we need to pour on all the gasoline because we've got some tailwinds behind us and we really got to move forward? Or is it something that, we're kind of entering either a catastrophic event or like a zombie event, which can also be kind of just a slow stasis and death. So I don't know
how would you know if the company is going towards that zombie slow death or
that's I think that it's extremely hard to look at yourself in the mirror and say the trajectory of this opportunity or this company is makes sense to continue because you've put in all this time and energy and capital. But I think there's, there are obvious signs like when really talented people leave, or it's really hard to attract new people, or you miss several quarters over selling, and having any positive signals of growth. I think that, it's, but you'll know, like in some respects, if it's your baby, it's really hard. I think if you're at a company you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, like, am I here because it's comfortable and it's not making a lot of traction? It's not growing relative to peers. It's not growing relative to its technology potential. But I think that's, fortunately or unfortunately, I think for the great majority of entrepreneurs, you don't hit that stage. People die a little bit more abruptly. But there are some that can kind of slowly wind down, and it's less and less likely that you're going to have a huge event after it. But we're even talking about like Informatica, not a zombie company, great performing company, but frankly, it's been around for a long time. Today, whatever is just announced that I got acquired by Salesforce. Like, I remember using Informatica. Oh my gosh, early 2000s, maybe. It's great. It's so like their progression to massive success looks different than maybe what we're all used to. Everyone kind of talks about like a windsurf around for whatever X months, a couple of years maybe, and then getting acquired by OpenAI, which is, we use it. It's great. It's phenomenal. But yeah, so I think like you don't know, but there were points in time where I had to give myself a gut check and say, do I want to keep following this leader? Do I want to start something on my own? Can I, in the case of the company that I had to shut down, I had to just say, like, I literally just announced it on LinkedIn. I'm finally CEO. I think I'm cool. Is this something that is sustainable? And in that case, like, I called the investors and we said, probably not. And so we just slowly wound it down. And so it is what it is, but you have to kind of live to fight another day if this is the world that you like. I'm kind of a startup guy now, so it's great.
I like the, name yourself CEO, you're cool kind of thing there.
Well, I think there's like, I think people can aspire to be a founder. People can aspire to be a CEO. People can aspire to have a great job and a great work-life balance. And, for whatever reason, like I had been an executive at a few companies and I wanted to feel what it felt like to be in the chair. And that was just me, for good or for bad. I think I'm really grateful that it didn't work out, because then I got to put together a team and an idea and a group of people that that I care for and aspire to work with, because they're all super talented, and have it be a little bit more on our terms than on joining something. So in the end, it was great. But yeah, there was a part of it that, I don't want to apologize. Like, I guess I just had worked a lot in my life, and I'm not 25 years old, and I wanted to try to see what it was like to be the boss and have that experience, because I had done other things at an executive level at very small and then some larger companies. And so it was what it was. And then it was a hot mess. And I learned a lot and, lived to fight another day.
During this whole time, you're raising a family. You had mentioned at the beginning, Midwestern values. How was raising a family during this time of peaks and valleys? How were the trade-offs? What feedback do you have for our audience that might right now be thinking of having their first kid?
Man, don't have kids and start a startup at the same time. No, it was the best. Frankly, like my son was born a few months before COVID hit. And, I think I was having a hard time thinking maybe I wanted to go and try something new. And then, I did, and it kind of blew up. And maybe like he was possibly the best distraction in the world, because he just, could center everything of like what mattered and what didn't. And I think what is nice is in a startup, at any company, frankly, corporate jobs, it's very easy to get wrapped up in your own thing, in your own mind or whatever. Dealing with an infant that's got, basic human functions that they're navigating kind of grounds you and makes things a little bit more interesting. We had our second child, I would say 4-ish months before I really was doing the fundraising for Legion. And that was hard, because we had 2 kids under 2 and we had a brand new company. I had a brand new company. And my wife works and she's got a great career. And so, yeah, I don't know. There's no sugarcoating it. Like there were just a lot of not well slept nights. And, but again, I think the benefit for those that are having families and children is I actually think you can only accomplish a few things each day when you're exhausted and you've got 2 young kids. and you have to hope that they're really focused on the most important ones for whatever you're doing in that career. And there's sleepless nights, and then there's also like you if you're fortunate enough to have a great spouse, and I certainly am, that can help you get through those days and nights, then you just kind of keep moving forward. And so I don't think there's any perfect time to do it. Sometimes you don't have the context when you're younger of what success is, and sometimes when you're older, maybe you have all the resources that you can deal with. But certainly it's not easy. But I think there are inherent values of sometimes just the focus of what you're only going to deal with what matters. And I mean, I don't know, like the number of times where I felt like I had a stressful meeting or a pitch, and then I'm dealing with like my daughter barfs on me or keeps me up all night. Like, I don't know, that kind of just takes you down a couple notches in ego or worries. And you just focus on, all right, there's also lots of bad things that you can come your way, whether, whatever it is, and you just got to navigate through it. And so I think it can be a blessing, but it's not trivial. I'll put it that way.
And now with your current company, you mentioned at the beginning that you went through a rebranding. What is that like to go through a rebrand? Why you're in growth mode?
Yeah.
And why did you guys go about doing it? Just wondering.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. Like we had our intuition was, I think, spot on years ago, where we really did feel like the model's proprietary or open source, we're going to keep getting better. And that there was just this big, hairy, gnarly problem of making this stuff really work, orchestrated between applications, data stores, the actual natural workflows that people have in these high stakes environments. We felt like a lot of the energy in LLMs was going to be in consumer or kind of public facing, which like we started well before ChatGPT, but we couldn't have anticipated that moment. We knew it was all getting better, but we also felt like orchestration of models, lots of models in enterprise, now agents in enterprise, was really a huge opportunity, which now people are kind of in. We've spent the last couple of years doing this and doing it in the most secure environments in the world, so like we feel like we're in a good base. But the name itself, we kind of use this idea, Yurts, and it was my fault. We were kidding around with Sean, like, what's the real idea? I'm like, well, I wanted this kind of flexible architecture, like a yurt, a tent. I wanted to keep it kind of humble, where you could transport it wherever, and I liked it. But it spoke to the technology, not necessarily to our customers, our internal story, or where we really saw the future going. And so, I mean, on the one hand, I think when you hear these storied companies and they have this name that worked perfectly, it all works. But this is for the entrepreneurs that don't know. Like they have an idea, they're like searching around on GoDaddy or Cloudflare and trying to buy cheap domains. You're not totally sure what's going to stick. And I think for our company, we grew to a point where we knew we were working in these highly secure environments. We knew our mission was really focused around orchestration of models and agents at scale. And we weren't, there wasn't an easy way to connect. And so when we became Legion Intelligence, that whole idea was really to be, I wanted something to be more aligned with, like, you think of mass, a legion, a Roman legion that's well organized. That is something that, I want people to feel like they have this army at their side. And so, I had to say, all right, well, do we actually have a brand? And the reality is we do, and we don't. We have a brand, and there's folks in the DoD that know us well, but we also branded one of the names of our products that they chose. So we actually weren't giving up that capital, but we are trying to speak more to the broader world about what we believe the future looks like. And so, the reality is, like, we're not Stripe, we're not Palantir in defense. And there was a moment in time that I think we could make the switch and lean into our end users a little bit more than the tech crowd that would understand the platform angle.
You just mentioned there DoD, Department of Defense. What is it like for a startup to be able to work with the Department of Defense? I would think that they would say, you're not an established company, it's too risky, good luck, it would take years to get through the process. And I mean, how does a startup go from very early stages to working with one of these huge government organizations, especially in the defense?
I mean, in in general, everything you said is factual, and it's a great question because at this time, I mean, the idea of working with the government and defense tech is really buzzy and hot. Maybe too hot some days. Um, and that just to get to that, but I'm gonna go back a little bit. If you swing the pendulum the other way in the 2017, 2018 timeframe, the Google choosing to not work with the Department of Defense because of an internal kind of kerfuffle, not wanting to work with, there's a project called Project Maven. Um, it was very not cool to be working with the Department of Defense if you're a Silicon Valley startup, but there are ones that did, and the one I was at did. And I really, it was kind of very much part of my family. And when I grew up like that, it always made sense and it was natural. So for startups now, I think the short answer is in some ways, it's like any other industry. If you're going to build an insure tech company, you really better know insurance. You better know networks. You better know language. You better know how to sell. You better know how to get contracts done. You better know about all of it. And I think a challenge with defense tech right now is it is buzzy and hot, and people see like, wow, the Department of Defense budget might be $1 trillion next year. Like, how can I get 1% of that? Right. And I think that's a fair question for any startup to want to go in. And I think there's a bunch of really interesting opportunities. But like any focused industry, it's pretty not trivial. It does take years. It takes years to get meaningful contracts. It takes years to get a clearance for yourself or your facility, for your software to be deployed. We somehow jumped that ship really, really quickly. We were very fortunate in that we were working with Special Operations Command as our lead organization for years. And that it just so happened that the 4-star general was thinking very much about large language models for infrastructure and enterprise, not purchasing a model. So he was actually in his organization in concert with one of the component commands, United States Army Special Operations Command. So they were thinking about like, how do we use these models more in our enterprise? And frankly, like not a lot of companies were. And so we were just had some meetings put together with them when we were. I mean, I met a couple of their folks. This is ChatGPT might have just come out like within days. And at this WeWork where I'm at today in 22, and I think we were about 4 or 5 people. But I just laid out, I said, look, this is where I think the challenges have been. This is where it's going. And we were fortunate enough to get a pretty large contract over the next 9 months to show them the technology, spend a lot of time getting to know and vet each other. And so we kind of jumped into a world where we went from very small company to, we had a research and development contract that was $16 million. And that kind of over 3 years, but that really helped us take off as a company. Since then, we've invested a ton into that relationship. We have, 20% of our company is a clearance. I think we have like 10 vets at the company, super talented individuals. And so it's, it's not a thing where you can say, I'm going to sell my software to the Department of Defense, and then overnight you land a $100 million contract and you're off and running. Frankly, the great majority of large software companies still aren't really working at scale for a bunch of reasons. A lot of them tied to just how the software is deployed, and it's changing. It's getting easier. But I think like there are ways to get grants. There are ways to kind of do these little competitions where you can progress as a software company, but it's not overnight. And people look at Palantir, and Palantir is an absolutely incredible juggernaut of a company that it started in 2006, maybe 2007. So it was a long time coming before it has become, arguably an overnight success over the last 5 years. It's not been. It's been building for a long time. And so I think for tech companies, especially software companies, in general, people advise you to not start there. To get product market fit, to understand how you're going to engage with customers, to just slowly grow, and then try to branch out into working with the defense community. We just had there's just like also, we had a number of people that have done it before that have worked in those types of environments. And we happen to be building technology that perfectly aligned with very secure deployments and use cases. And we were the first Gen AI deployed stack that went into a bare metal environment in the Department of Energy. That was like a first of its kind. And so there's a little bit of right place, right time too, where that wasn't where Anthropic, OpenAI, and others were putting their energy at that time. Now there's a lot more of the big companies that are in that space, and we have natural relationships where we compete and complement some of these other large vendors.
Question on one before the interview. I mean, we were introduced by Manish Patel, who's a past guest, probably the friendliest VC in the industry. How important is it to work with VCs that are all green flags, no red flags, nice VCs? How important is that?
I think that's a great question. And Manish is awesome. Super gifted. It's fun is done extremely well. He only does Series A funds. But I think there's a question of like, as founders, if they're fortunate enough to get to meet and get opportunities to work with a number of venture capital firms, if that's the route they're going, what do they need the most at that stage? And so I think there are some incredible storied, really large firms that can offer a ton of marketing behind them. There are firms that are really good at kind of, I don't want to say care and feeding, but helping guide young founders that have never done this before, that have never hired people before, that have never built a marketing department before, they've never done anything. And then, in our case, co-founder Jason Schnitzer is, we worked together for an extremely long time. Then he ran infrastructure at Looker. Then he was pretty senior at Meta on their production engineering from a bunch of their messaging products. We always say we're old. We're Waldorf and Statler of the Muppets. If you get to know us, we kind of bicker at each other, but we're super good buddies. What we needed were hardworking, confident, humble, no BS VC partners that could just come in. We have great conversations. We're friendly. And we're going to focus on our company and a relatively small cohort of companies. In Manish's case, in Nava, they only do A's. They make real bets against those A's, and he's all in. And so, the story goes, when I met Manish, we were kind of on the whole circuit of telling people a story on why infrastructure, AI infrastructure, agentic infrastructure was going to be extremely important in the world. This is for our Series A, and in the Department of Defense was going to be this thing that's really, really taking off. And this is 23, summer 23. Not that many people like that story, even in 23. ChatGPT was happening, but Manish just got it. And not only did he get it, but he was so nice on the phone that I thought he was fake because we did it over a Zoom call. And then he said, "Hey, let's meet up later this week." We met down in Palo Alto, sat at a diner for 4 hours, and just got to know him, his life, his perspectives. And I think what Jason and I gravitated towards is just we just synced on how we approach problems, how we address, frustrations, challenges, how do we go to market, just kind of like our ethos aligned. And so what I've seen in the past being affiliated with other boards or other executive teams is sometimes they're super, super high functioning. Sometimes they're just kind of a mess. And it also depends on the founder's personality and how they work with the board. And Manish is just a super high quality, high integrity individual that I thought, we could focus on building the company and have a really strong supporter and not on all of our board readouts. And we could be really nimble together. And it's played out. And so I think it's awesome. We had for a Series B, which we did about a year ago, Ross Rubini from XYZ led that, and he was in the A as a follow.
Ross is a future guest on this show. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So Ross should be a future guest on the show because Ross is like the OG defense tech VC guy. I mean, he's invested in some incredible companies, and if you look at his portfolio, the number of companies, it's not that he just had like one massive bet. And there's some companies that have put in huge bets in a Palantir or SpaceX or Anduril, and those are absolutely incredible companies. Ross has made some of those bets, Palantir, Anduril. I don't think he's in SpaceX. But he's also just done a number of other defense tech and government tech companies, public sector companies. He really believes in it. And so what was cool is, for us is we had Manish and Ross said, hey, I think this is growing at a really interesting pace. Maybe we should, he's kind of flirted at like, maybe he wants to lead the B. And, so we talked a lot, talked to a handful of other VCs just about our progress and where we were going. And kind of at the end of the day, we just saw like, what are we doing? Like, we know this guy. He knows our industry. He's awesome. Manish is great. They get along well. Like our board meetings are going to be something that we can get hard feedback or get, quick praise and just keep moving. And so I think what was great about having Manish and then Ross is we had someone that could, help us progress quickly through our Series A. And then in our B, someone that really understood the market, understood that like there could be a continuing resolution, that there was going to be an election in November, that there'd be potentially weird things happening in the government, and where we could work to take advantage of it, where we could navigate the challenges of it. And Ross has been great. And so, I mean, I think for everyone that's fortunate enough to pick their board, I guess if I'd give any advice, it would be think about what you're trying to accomplish and then the benefits and the drawbacks of those people that you choose. And ultimately for us, we wanted like-minded people that understood the market, so that understood how we wanted to operate, and that we're gonna, if you're venture backed, you may go 3 years and die. You may go 2 years and be acquired, or you may go a while. And so these people are going to be on a really huge part of that journey, just day in, day out with you, or not necessarily every day, but they're going to be there, right? And it's been great. And so like I can pick up a phone and call them at any time, text them at any time, and it's been extremely positive. And so for the rest of the B, we also then worked with Glynn Capital, who was very early in Palantir, and they're not on the board, but they were the follow for our Series B, and they just got it. Like they just understood what we were doing. They understood how we think about progression in the defense tech space. And I mean, ultimately, they've just been awesome partners as well. So we've been, even from our pre-seed, we worked with Robin Vasson of Mango Capital, James Cham of Bloomberg Beta. James wrote a check in part just because I had a great relationship with him at a prior company. And we've just been blessed with like wonderful support from the venture capital community. But I think a lot of it has also been, we've been able to be selective at certain points in time where, we can bring in some really common ideas and features of the people that we want to work with.
How important is it to be thinking about the next round, which investors are going to come in while you're still in the current round? Because as you're talking about all those VCs you mentioned, it almost seemed like everything had been lined up for the next round, even when you're on the present. Yeah. But, maybe is that just luck that it happened that way? Or
that's a little bit of selection bias, the genius of what we were building along the way. No, I mean, I think there were people like James Cham at Bloomberg Beta who I've just known for years, since I was at this company called Primer, and he's delightful. And there were others I learned, to get along with or get to know and got along with really well along the way. I think it's a great question. I think as you go into later stages, it is increasingly important. Stakes are higher, capital raises more. In some ways, it can concentrate the number of firms that you can work with. I'm probably terrible at it, if I'm being transparent. I actually talked to a major fund today, and I don't that often, because there's a little bit of reality. Like, you kind of know the lay of the land in certain investors. If you've been around for a while, you meet a lot of them, and you know enough people that have worked with different firms of like, roughly it could be about one of these end firms. But like, what really matters is like how well you're doing. Like, I could work with there are a few firms that, like, I knew some folks that I really liked and they liked me, and they didn't want to invest with me. And it wasn't personal, but they just didn't, they didn't invest at that time. And so maybe because they just didn't want, some aspect of the metrics of the story, I'm sure, I botched. But I think the reality is, like, all that really matters is your customers, your growth, your team, your story. And then, I think you can try to mature your next rounds a little bit and get to know and engage with people. But, progress usually speaks for itself. And I don't think I'm over the top. Like, I don't think I'm God bless him. Like, I'm not Adam Newman. I can't like tell a story that everyone just wants to, invest in. So I think a lot of what we do is, we're trying to build a great product for the customers. And I think when we do that, we've been able to fortunately be rewarded. And, and then along the way, you kind of are trying to find some firms to engage with, but I don't have like a master script laid out of like who and when and where. I do know relatively like timing of when we would potentially want to do a raise, some milestones on products and customers that you can kind of see out that far. Say, well, if all these things line up, we could go and start talking early next year or whatever. We could wait another year, maybe, and so there's a little bit of that where I think, I think other people are masterful in how to orchestrate their relationship with investors. And that is really important as you move into series, I would say BC and beyond. But we did an inside round for our B almost entirely. We only brought in one additional investor. So I don't know. I haven't had to, we'll see, right? You can check back in with me in a year or whatever. Because if and when we do a Series C, that's going to be a fairly large new round of capital from new investors. So, I guess you're inspiring me to get out on the road, Sean.
Well, it must be that investment banker inside of me.
Exactly.
But question with all this, I mean, what's the narrative, or what's the difference between founding an early stage startup in your 20s versus in your 40s? What are the advantages there? And before wrapping it up, and also, Ben, you haven't even told us really what you're doing at Legions. To what should we expect? What are things we should look forward to in the next year? So, 2 questions there. Not sure where you want to start.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can tell you to just answer them in sequential order. I think you always just have to kind of think about your capacity to execute against a runway. When you're 20 something and you're poor and you have roommates and whatever, can live cheap, you don't have mouths to feed, you don't need as much capital, and you build your time buffer that way, and you can put everything into it. When you're in your 40s, in some cases, and it's highlighted, but I sometimes think not enough. Like, you've maybe made some money, you've maybe had an exit, and a lot of the companies that are successful are women and men that have had exits, and they can find that buffer of time. So, I'd helped wrap up that other company, and then basically was noodling on a few ideas for the better part of a year, and was really honing what this is. And I had time, and I had a bit of capital to run. I also had a family, so I had my own sense of urgency, me whining about having to take care of kids in the nights. And I was like, whatever, that was its own thing. So I think there's just your capacity to create enough runway, either mentally, physically, socioeconomically, for yourselves and your peers. Like, you want to create the economics and the time for you to land that first real product, that those first real meetings, those first real customers. Where people get wedged is when they say, like, I'm going to, start this company, and they're not. And this, I do have friends and people I talk to, and they'll say, I want to start this idea. You realize, like, they have 6 months of runway before they have to have a job, or they're like getting a second mortgage. And you say, like, what do you want out of this? And do you want to try to mature something at a company for a bit to see if it makes sense? And I don't know if there's a right answer one way or the other, but I'm grateful the perspectives of the work life I've lived before starting this company. But some days I wouldn't mind being 25 and just being able to grind in a different way than I do now. As far as what are we doing at Legion? I've kind of danced around it a bit, but basically we think that this new world of agents and the world of large language models and AI models is 100% the future of how work is going to be done, whether it's augmented or parts of it actually automated. And we think that the orchestration of making those things work in secure environments, in cleared environments, is actually really, really hard. And so we work with very large enterprises and very, very secure enterprises in everything from very sensitive to more of hypersensitive networks. And how can you do everything from the most basic administrative knowledge management or basic workflows and tasks? How do we have agents and assistants take those over? To how do we think about some of the most challenging questions in the national security community? In abstract, I think you can think about things like knowledge management and work automation, task automation as something that we do particularly well. We just do it for legacy systems. I would say the boring, hard industries of the world, the world of defense, manufacturing, aerospace, things that when people really build stuff where the precision and the security questions are extremely high. That's where we fit in. And so we're not building a B2C company. It is a B2B company with heavy focus on national security and legacy industries.
That's fantastic. And if anyone wants to learn more about you and what you're working on, what's the best way to go about doing it?
Well, you can hit us up. Our website is www.legionintel.com. And you can, ping me on LinkedIn, and happy to answer any questions along the way. But, for all the entrepreneurs, it's a heck of a journey. I'm in it right now, where it moves so quickly each day that I don't know if we're going to be a wild success or roadkill in the next day. But you get up each day and you keep grinding, and so far so good for us.
Fantastic. So we'll have that information in the show notes. Once again, I want to thank Manish for making the introduction that allowed this week's episode to take place. Even though I think when he listens to this, he's going to get enough compliments that he's going to go, okay, this was a payment for it. But no, I really want to thank all the people out there that have been supporting the podcast over the years. And to look at our archives, please go to thesiliconvalleypodcast.com to check that out and to find out what we're working on in the future. Some of the things we have coming up, we have a big event August 14th in San Francisco at WorkWise. That's going to be fantastic. Look for that information on the website. And for our audience, when I'm not the host of the Silicon Valley Podcast, I'm an investment banker focused on mergers, acquisitions, growth capital. Connect with me on LinkedIn to find out more. Always open for a conversation. And Ben, with that, I got to thank you for taking the time to be on this week's episode of the Silicon Valley Podcast.
Thanks, Sean. Good to be here, man.